All right, hello everyone. Uh, Welcome. Uh, so we're going to start the presentation right at 1 o'clock. And my name is Katrina. I'm the Fort White Alive host this afternoon for camp cooking. So if that's what you are looking for, you are in the correct place. See, one more person is joining us, which is fantastic. All right, so welcome and thank you for joining Fort White Alive's virtual Earth Week at Home presentation on camp cooking with Paul Shipman. We are so pleased that you've tuned in to safely celebrate our beautiful planet with us. My name is Katrina and I will be moderating this presentation. To make sure there are no technical glitches during the presentation, we ask that you keep your microphone off. I will be collecting your questions in the chat function and I will share them with Paul throughout our presentation. So anytime that you have a question, feel free to drop that in the chat. And when we have a good time to break, I'll be posing your questions to Paul, as well as at the end of the program today. Enjoy the program. I look forward to this one as well. I will turn things over to Paul, just make sure that we can get you unmuted and we'll head off.
Hello, everyone. Welcome. I'm very excited to be here. I'm just going to get my screen going here. Thanks, Katrina, for the introduction. Today, what we're going to talk about is the one-pot meal ethos and how we can cook by just adding water. I am Paul Shipman. I have recently published a book called Feast on Adventure that Fort White is carrying in their gift shop. I am a Paddle Canada instructor, sometimes a guide, and a culinary enthusiast. And I've spent a little over 4 years now designing and testing recipes for freeze-dried, dehydrated, and instant foods, and creating just add water meals. The reason that this is here today as part of our Earth Week celebration is that one-pot meals are a key pillar of Leave No Trace. There's some real key benefits to one-pot meals that help us and help the environment. The first being that it really lightens our load when we're traveling, either that be that hiking or skiing or cycling or canoeing or what have you. It decreases the garbage that we potentially would be making out in the wilderness. It eliminates our reliance on campfires, which minimizes, destruction of wood and trees around areas and minimizes somewhat the pollution that's created by campfire smoke. And ultimately, we can just add water, which makes it really simple for us to prepare in the field, which means that we spend less time cooking, less time cleaning, and more time enjoying camp. There's lots of options for this kind of meal nowadays. First of all, there's commercial. Most of you are going to be familiar with this kind of meal. We're talking about Backpacker's Pantry, Mountain House. You can even use like Knorr Hamburger Helper type meals that you can just get at any grocery store. And they'll do a really good job of giving you options of one pot, just add water meals. There's also, do-it-yourself dehydrated meals. And there's a lot of books on the market that you can go and purchase a lot of different places these days that will, give you recipes where you can kind of create a whole meal and then dehydrate that meal and then rehydrate it with varying success in the backcountry. And then there's kind of what I'm dubbing today the Feast on Adventure way, or the way that the process that I've created for doing this sort of meal, which is different and provides some different benefits aside from, commercial meals and the standard DIY dehydrated stuff. Specifically, it means that we can create some efficiency for ourselves. Instead of spending a day making a recipe and dehydrating that recipe, instead what we can do is we can collect ingredients if that meets our lifestyle better, right? That means like no prep of ingredients. We can go buy stuff that the grocery store already has, or we can look further afield for products that we can order, like freeze-dried ground beef or something like that. But it also means that if we want to do stuff ourselves more to save cost or just because we like doing that sort of work, we can focus on dehydrating ingredients and not meals, right? So that really simplifies the work that we do with our dehydrator. So where possible, we're able to use grocery staples, things like, instant rice, instant potatoes, herbs, spices, even harkening back to what I said before, things like Knorr sides or hamburger helper sides and things like that, we can incorporate into our meals and modify them with other ingredients that we've dehydrated ourselves or things that we've been able to buy from different locations. Ultimately, I want us to be able to do what works for us. Dehydrate your own or buy from commercial sources. And most importantly, doing it the way that I talk about in my book allows everyone to manage their own dietary restrictions. For a lot of us, that doesn't mean a lot. For 95% of the population, outside of personal preferences, generally we don't necessarily have a lot of issues going on, but there are people who are allergic to things like gluten and dairy and nuts, and people who are on low salt diets, and people who need extra fiber, or people who are diabetic and need low sugar. So there's lots of things in the culinary marketplace these days in terms of dietary restrictions that people need to manage. And even if you're in the lucky 95th percentile of folks who can eat whatever they choose, you still potentially want to be cognizant of what is in your meals, right? Like a backpacker's pantry meal is shelf stable for 25 years in a package, and that's not simply because it's dry. There's other preservatives and things like that in that meal that may be something that you choose to avoid, and you should be able to do that if you want. Ultimately, I really recommend focusing on freeze-dried, dehydrated, and instant foods. And from my book, that is pretty much 100% what the recipes are made of. Why is freeze-dried so important? Because specific ingredients are best freeze-dried. For example, most meats they don't dehydrate as well as we'd like. They do what's called case hardening, which means when we go to rehydrate like a jerky or something like that, it often still remains very toothsome and crunchy. Other vegetables like corn or peas, when you dehydrate them, they're fully encapsulated in the skin that they grew in, and they also have a difficulty in rehydrating well to a texture and consistency that you're familiar with. That said, it's not necessary to use freeze-dried ingredients, and certainly not always. And even when it comes to meats, I mean, you're going to be able to make a good meal with dehydrated beef jerky or dehydrated corn and peas. It's just, it will be more different from a conventional meal than if you were able to use freeze-dried. So for me, the must-have ingredients that people will want to stock if they are interested in making their own just add water one-pot meals. Freeze-dried meats, like I was just talking about, there's really no substitution for this. Dehydrated meats do work, but they never really shed that case-hardened texture, and the flavor's never quite the same as you would find in a conventional meal. Ground beef and sausage never really escapes that, and regardless of whether or not you boil it or leave it for 20 minutes in hot water or anything like that, it basically remains crunchy throughout. Bouillon is a really, really key ingredient. In this world of just add water meals, we're taking cooking out of the picture. So we have no browning going on in our meals, whether or not that means, there's no caramelized onions or no browning of tofu or chicken or beef. And those reactions that happen over high heat when we're cooking have a really big impact on the depth of flavor and the amount of flavor in our meals. We need to be able to replace that somehow. And bouillon is a really good option for that, whether that be a meat-based bouillon or a vegetable-based bouillon. What's really important here is that we don't want to use like better than bouillon or OXO cubes or anything like that, because those particular products have a lot of salt in them. And in all of these meals, we're creating single servings ultimately for these one pot meals. And the amount of bouillon that you would need to have in there to achieve the flavor that you're looking for would amplify the salt so much that it would be almost unpalatable. Now there is really good bone broth bouillon that you can find in powdered form, usually in jars, well, I guess plastic jars, but they are on the market, and that's definitely what you want to look for in this case. Although I will also say that you can make your own if you are interested in putting in some time. Instant rice is another one of those key ingredients. It's ubiquitous. You can find it everywhere, really, really cheap. Minute rice is probably the best one that you can get. And it does a really good job of packing in calories into our meals and carbohydrates, both things that we need if we are outdoors exercising and needing to recover. It also makes meals really simple and really quick to create or to prepare, because generally our instant rice only takes 5 minutes with hot water to achieve the consistency we're looking for. For those of us who like pasta in our meals and want that kind of carbohydrate, instant noodles are really important. And what I'm talking about here is the kind of noodle that you would find in a packet of ramen soup, from the supermarket, or what you can get in the Asian aisle usually is kind of like a rectangular package with squares of instant noodles. Those almost perfectly replicate like a spaghetti in a pasta meal, and it only requires hot water and a soak of about 2 to 3 minutes to achieve the right consistency, and the flavor will be like spot on for a spaghetti or an Alfredo or something like that. Clear gel is an unusual product. A lot of you may have never heard of it. It's a cornstarch. It's a modified cornstarch. It's used a lot in pie preparation to assist pie filling to gel up, particularly in fruit pies like cherry pie or blueberry pie or something like that. It's really, really helpful for us when we're making a meal that we want to have a viscous sauce in, like a gravy or something like that. It really helps to thicken that sauce up to the consistency that we're familiar with. There are alternatives, of course. You can use just cornstarch. The downside to using cornstarch is that cornstarch has a tendency to clump. And so just putting dry cornstarch into your meal and then adding hot water will probably leave you with more lumps than you would enjoy having. The other alternative is that you can use xanthan gum, which is a more modern ingredient that you can find in the health aisle generally. And it is a fiber that swells up and causes things to gel. If you were to use xanthan gum, you need to use it in much smaller quantities than what my recipes call for in clear gel or cornstarch. But it will do a really good job of gelling up your meals. The downside to switching out clear gel and cornstarch for xanthan gum is that it reduces the amount of calories in your meal. And if you're trying to achieve a caloric base to keep you going over the days, you're probably losing 50 to 100 calories from your meal by changing that up. Then salt is really important. Salt's a really key flavor component in a lot of our meals, but it's also a really important addition in our meals in terms of getting electrolytes back into our diet and into our bodies. Like if we are out exercising, hiking, skiing, climbing, biking, whatever, we're getting a lot of lactic acid buildup. And one of the key things that we need to do is to replenish the electrolytes in our body so that we don't end up, suffering from cramping and stuff like that. And then finally, citric acid. So this is something that you can find at spice stores, sometimes in the spice aisle at the supermarket or at health stores. This is a dry powder that we can use to make sure that we're incorporating sour notes in our meals. In a few minutes, I'm going to talk about balancing flavors, and sour is one of the really important flavor components if we want to get, complete, fully rounded flavored meals that we'll be able to enjoy out in the backcountry. So, as I was saying earlier, one of the key efficiencies to preparing meals this way is that we have the ability to dehydrate things ourselves and to focus on dehydrating ingredients, which means that we can have like tons of ingredients, different ingredients, even in the dehydrator all at once, run it overnight, stack, put it all in bags the next day and just use them when we need to. The ones that I think are key for doing yourself at home, really because of simplicity and cost, are fajita veggies. Now, fajita veggies are a combination of peppers and onions. You can see them in the photo on the right in the bottom two trays there. What I do for this is we're all in Winnipeg, so I like to go to the Sobeys Cash and Carry on, where are they now? Arlington and Dufferin. And they have in the freezer section pre-sliced fajita veggies in bags that are like $3 or $4 a bag, and you're getting twice the quantity you would get for that same price of fresh vegetables, but they're already pre-sliced for you and ready to go. So I just buy that, roll them out on the dehydrator and turn them on overnight, and by the morning they're done, and a bag or two will last me the whole summer for these meals. One of my other sessions that I've done about this, people have asked, why use frozen and not fresh? And for me, one of the really key reasons that fresh is so valuable to us, outside of just the efficiency and cheapness of it's already cut and really cheap, is that the fact that it has frozen means that ice crystals have formed already inside of the cell walls that make up these products, causing them to break a little, which actually helps a lot in rehydration. That means that there's a lot more openings in those vegetables, so that when we add hot water later in the field, the vegetable is really good at soaking it up, rather than a fresh veggie that's dehydrated that doesn't have that same kind of thing happen to it. Another really good ingredient to dehydrate yourself at home is curry paste. Now this is something that you would get at the grocery, or you can find it in Chinatown, whether or not you want Thai curries or Indian curries or something like that. If that's within your wheelhouse of the kind of meals you want to eat, you're not going to find good powdered products available on the market. So the only thing you can really do is dehydrate that at home and then put it through a blender when it's done, so that you have a powder that you can use for making those meals. And it actually works really well. I have a Thai green curry recipe in the book that tastes really close to a conventional curry that you would have at home. Kimchi is an interesting one. Obviously, this is going to suit everybody, but if you're into things like kimchi, I have a really nice recipe for kimchi rice that rehydrates really well. Kimchi dehydrates and reconstitutes really well with hot water really quickly. It's also a really nice treat to have as a snack if you're into spicy, salty, tangy things. Not that in the field that has a lot of calories, because it's just vegetables, but that does help with fiber in your diet if that's something that you're looking for. And it is a nice dry snack to just have at home if you're dehydrating. So bread, this is an interesting one. I know you're all looking at that thinking, okay, is he going to rehydrate a sandwich? And no, I am not. But this is why bread. Dehydrating bread lets us make our own kind of stuffing type dish that we can have in the field. So whether that be served with chicken or turkey or beef or tofu or beans or whatever, it gives us a lot more control over what we can have in the field. Now, a lot of us could just have stovetop stuffing, and that works perfectly well. So if you aren't, culinarily inclined to just want to make your own, add water stuffing, then go out there and get stovetop and use it instead. But for folks looking for potentially a gluten-free option, or someone who's gluten-free and can't add yeast or sugar or whatever, basically, if you have dietary requirements where it would make sense to make your own, absolutely, dehydrating bread is a really easy solution for making a stuffing. And the reason that we would want to do that is just to throw more variety into our meals. All of these are just add water meals, and we definitely want to make sure that we have carbohydrates because of why we're using these meals in the first place. And that starts to limit us, right? Rice, potatoes, pasta. What else can we do? Well, bread is another option, and making a stuffing. For my vote for those of the culinarily inclined, I actually really like doing it with bread because it gives me more flavor options. If I want to do a pumpernickel stuffing, or I want to do a cornbread stuffing, or I want to do like a sourdough stuffing, those options become available to me by dehydrating the bread, whereas I couldn't get that in like a stovetop kind of situation. Canned meats are really great in this kind of meal. And this is why. So I talked earlier about why freeze-dried is like my thumbs up for meat, because of the case hardening that you find in other dehydrated meat. Well, that case hardening isn't as pronounced in canned meats. And the reason that I think that is that the canning process involves putting all of these meats under pressure in a pressure canner kind of thing. And I think that that has the same impact on the meats as freezing vegetables does, that it opens up more of the cell walls in those meats, allowing them to rehydrate a lot better. So I've done, canned Spam, canned corned beef, canned turkey, canned chicken, canned shrimp even. And those all actually rehydrate surprisingly well. The thing that we need to know about those, though, are that they are generally quite a lot higher in fat, which means that they are at risk of going rancid in a shorter period of time. So the meals that we make with these things have a much shorter shelf life than if we were using other dehydrated meats or freeze-dried meats. Fermented lemon is a lemon product that you might find difficult to find at normal local groceries. There's quite a few African groceries that have popped up around Winnipeg in the last few years, and you can probably find them then. They're a Moroccan product, but you can also make them at home. And I have a video on my website that kind of documents that whole process of making them and dehydrating them. The reason that I include it here is because it's a really nice way to include sour and lemon flavors in your meals. I have a free ebook also available through my website that has, it's a recipe companion to the main book and has 10 extra recipes in it. And fermented lemon gets used a couple times in that book, making things like lemon chicken, souvlaki chicken, lemon potatoes, things like that. And it's not like just using citric acid doesn't really compare to using fermented lemon. You don't get the bright lemon flavors, you just get the sour. And dehydrating lemon rind yourself and just putting it in without going through the fermented process first results in a lot of extra bitter flavors in your meal, which won't be as enjoyable. So for me, fermented lemon, I mean, it was something I was making regularly anyway, so I just kind of took to dehydrating it. So I do recommend it in specific applications, but certainly not required if you are just trying to make some meals. Diced peppers, like fajita veggies, they have a lot of applications. There's a goulash in my book that, features a lot of pepper in it, red pepper in it. It's another one of those things that you can get frozen if you go to the right place, already pre-diced, really easy to put in your dehydrator. It's a really good way to add vegetables to your meals. I've had some feedback from people who have tried my recipes or looked at my recipe book. And I mean, I haven't done research myself on this, but they say that they don't see a lot of vegetables in a lot of the other recipes that they're following. And it's nice to be able to add in those vegetables to make sure that there's, fiber and nutrients and stuff like that in our meals. Hominy, yeah.
Hi, I have a question that's just come in. I'm wondering if I could pose it to you now.
Yeah.
Okay. So Phil is wondering how exactly to rehydrate veggies just with boiling water. So maybe you're coming up to that point, but that question just came in.
Yeah, so I'm trying to think if I actually cover that in this presentation. I don't think that I do. So the gist is, like when I'm making these meals, what we do is we mix everything together in a container, like a bag or something like that, to bring it out with us. When I rehydrate them, I always do it in an insulated bowl, but you don't have to. You can just do it in the bag. Basically, what you want to do is cover the meal with boiling water. So I boil water in the field and then pour it over until either everything just starts to float or the water reaches the top layer of the food, depending on what happens in the bowl. And then I cover it and I just let it sit for 5 minutes, sometimes 10, depending on what it is. If when it's done, it doesn't feel like, after 5 minutes, I should say, if it doesn't feel like it's fully rehydrated and there's no water left in the bowl, then I'll add a little bit more and cover it up again. In my book, for the recipes that I've done, I do have recommended water quantities to pour in, and they are, pretty good. They're really there with the intention of those who are tracking their fuel because some people don't like to carry more fuel than they need. And they, have got it down to a science how much fuel they need to boil a liter of water. They like to know how much water they need. So I have put that in the book, and it's fairly accurate. But sometimes, depending on environmental conditions, right? Like if you're in high altitudes, it's going to take longer, maybe take more water. What the ambient temperature is going to change things. So that kind of all comes into play. But basically, the idea is just cover the meal with water and let it sit for 5 to 10 minutes.
We have one more question that also applies here. Someone is wondering if you can use your kitchen oven as a dehydrator.
Yes, you can. You'll have varying success depending on what your kitchen oven can get to. So basically, you want your kitchen oven on the lowest temperature possible. And so most dehydrating is done between 125 and 145 degrees Fahrenheit. But you can still dehydrate at higher temperatures than that. So I have heard of people doing it at 150 or even 175 if their oven can get there. Some ovens won't go below 200 though, and 200 is going to be too high. You're going to cook and not dehydrate. And you should be prepared for more case hardening. So you're probably going to have more difficulty rehydrating things at those higher temperatures that were dehydrated at those higher temperatures, but it still makes like good jerky and things that you would just eat dry. So your mileage may vary. What I will say is that if you're not into getting a dehydrator itself, there are quite a few toaster ovens that you can get that come into the right temperature range for dehydrating if you're interested in that.
Thanks,
So
Paul.
hominy, yeah, no problem. So hominy is a South American corn product. It's made from, like if you're familiar with corn nuts and corn that generally would get fed to animals more so than us. It comes from that kind of corn, not the corn on the cob we're familiar with, but it's processed in a particular way to come out kind of like a pasta or a rice or something like that. And it's really nice in some stews and things like that. So pozole, as an example, is a South American delicacy that's a nice stew that features hominy. It's something that you can't buy dehydrated, so it's something that you need to do yourself if you'd be interested in trying it. Diced onion, like the red peppers and fajita veggies, if you're not down for using like just onion flakes that you can already buy at a grocery store, dehydrating your own, the absolute easiest, best way is to buy frozen and put it in your dehydrator. Yes, you can just chop onions and put them into your dehydrator, and if you want to, go ahead. It's going to take you, an hour to get it all ready to have enough to dehydrate, whereas a bag is, a 5-minute job. And finally, sauerkraut. This is one that I really enjoy. I know not everyone's going to love sauerkraut, but again, like kimchi, it's nice as a snack on its own. But I also have a really nice meal, probably one of my top 5 favorites in my book, that features sauerkraut. And again, something you'd have to dehydrate yourself. You can make it from scratch at home, or you can buy it in any form at the grocery store, and it just goes in the dehydrator, 125, leave it overnight, good to go. So then we have some important cook tools. When we're kind of living the leave no trace one pot meal lifestyle, it really simplifies what we need to bring with us, which means there's less cleaning and less stuff to carry. And if we want to make the most of it, this is what we need. Number 1 is a water boiling stove. You can use any camp stove to cook these meals, but if you really want to reduce your environmental footprint, getting one that's specifically designed for boiling meals or boiling water is your best bet. That's things like the MSR wind burner or the jet boil. That's going to minimize the amount of fuel you burn, which has tons of environmental impacts in terms of what pollution you're creating, how regularly you're buying, how often you're throwing out cans of fuel and stuff like that. So basically, they use way less fuel to boil water, which means that you carry less fuel, which means that overall your pack weight is smaller and you don't need to rely on campfires and things like that. Another alternative would be the photo on the right there. That is my ghillie kettle. It's what my wife and I use regularly when we're camping. It is a double-walled chimney, meaning that all of the water is in that chimney around that fire. and it basically creates a fire tornado in the middle. There's a hole at the very bottom that you don't see that sucks air in, and it goes up the chimney and causes a cyclone of flame inside. And I can boil water in there sometimes just over 3 minutes, although the average is closer to 5. And it's just fueled by twigs and pine cones and things like that that you find scattered around. I wouldn't really recommend it for hikers because it's bulky. It's no heavier than, say, like the wind burner or the jet boil, but it is bulkier. For paddling, I like it. It fits in my big bag and I can portage it easily. An insulated mug or bowl, like I talked about earlier, is really key. They really help out with rehydration because it keeps the temperature higher during the rehydration period, thanks to the insulation. I use the GSI Dualist and some other GSI products, but there's other versions out there that work just as well. And there's lots of instructions online for do-it-yourself cozy for whatever kind of mug or bowl you use regularly. A spork clearly is just a really good utensil in this case. It's a spoon and a fork, and that's really all you need with just that water meal. A water filtration system is key. Water becomes the main cooking feature here and the main ingredient in all of our meals. So it's really important that it be clean and potable. In a lot of cases, we are not necessarily boiling our water long enough to make it potable. So our best scenario is that we're using filtered water. And finally, a mini teaspoon set is really helpful. This is something that you're going to keep at home, not that you're going to take out in the field, but because we are making single servings in these meals, that does mean that things like spices and salt, we're putting in a very little bit. Like there's a lot of cases where we're putting in 1/8 of a teaspoon of citric acid or a 1/16 of a teaspoon of something. And I happen to have a 2 teaspoon set, like a large teaspoon set that includes an 1/8 teaspoon. So I generally just use that because it's there and I figure I can eyeball half of that for a 1/16. But it can be helpful to have a little mini teaspoon set.
So Paul, I'll just let you know it's 1:30. We have until about 1:35, or 45, sorry.
Oh, okay.
But including a little bit of time for questions at the end. We may be able to go a little bit over that, but just to give you an idea.
Cool, thank you.
You're welcome.
I might have to start motoring that. Okay, so recipe design. So one of the key things in my book is, aside from just having recipes in it, it teaches you how to make your own recipes from your family favorites. And so there are some overarching principles that I want to apply to those concepts. One, we need calories. We're out there exercising regularly, and we need to replenish the calories that we're using every day. Two, I think that we want a flavor reward at the end of the day. We don't just want to eat whatever. We want it to be satisfying. And I really want to sit down by the water and enjoy my meal and look out over the sunset or the loon swimming by or whatever. So what's really key here in making that happen is that we need to balance our flavors. I hope all of us kind of remember from grade school the 4/5 flavors that are key. So that means we want a little bit of salt, a little bit of sweet, a little bit of acid, and a little bit of bitter in all of our meals. Not necessarily in equal components, but we want a little bit of all of that to make something taste good. And we want to find the right balance between them to achieve that. For those of you who maybe haven't learned yet about umami, I don't think it's that new, but it's maybe over the last 5 to 10 years that it's become a really popular concept. It's the idea of this 5th flavor whose purpose is to elevate all of the other flavors and round out a whole meal. And we find those flavors in things that come from amino acids, like what we would find in a bouillon, or things like MSG, or soy sauce or tomato paste. These things have deep flavor compounds that cause all of the other flavors in the dish to rise and meld together in a beautiful mouth picture. And so the next things we want to think about is we are not cooking. right? So like I talked about earlier, we want to make sure that we're able to replace the flavors that we lose because of that. We want to plan our herbs and spices carefully because some spices need heat to bloom and others lose their flavor with heat. So for example, like a chili powder blooms under heat, and that makes its flavor really full, whereas something like a thyme, when heat is applied, that really starts causing the flavor to diminish. So usually when we're cooking, we would like add the chili powder early on to let that bloom and fill out the whole meal. But then if we were adding thyme, we would add that near the very end of cooking so that it gets mixed in and the flavor contributes, but it doesn't get reduced. So we need to be aware of that when we're deciding how to incorporate those in a meal where we don't cook. We want to provide energy by including carbohydrates, and we want to help with fatigue and recovery by including protein and electrolytes. Because we do have a bit of a time constraint, I'm going to skip over this slide. For those who want to learn more about how to convert a recipe that you're familiar with into something that you can just add water to, my website has 2 videos showing how I convert a sloppy Joe to a just add water meal, as well as a stuffed pepper into a just add water meal. So feel free to watch those videos later. I'm just going to jump quickly through all the animations here as quickly as I can.
Thanks. I'll just let everyone know I popped the link to Paul's website into the chat. And I'm also just going to, one more time, pop the link to the order for the book, for Paul's book. Pop that in there too in the chat. So you can save those web links for later. This is fantastic. I'm learning so much.
Good, good. So some other things that I learned on this journey of designing recipes is that some unusual and difficult ingredients can really raise some of our meals to the next level. A lot of these are sourceable online, but they can be difficult to find. So 1, instant quinoa. Instant quinoa is difficult to find, but it exists. A lot of times when you go looking for it, it's out of stock, so you just have to be patient and look for it. Outdoor Herbivore is my favorite place to get it. It works really well. It's a great option for those of you who are vegetarian or vegan, who want to switch up the rice in the recipes that I've provided. Quinoa works just as well as the rice in almost all of those recipes, and it really adds a lot of protein to those meals, right? So if you're not getting protein from other sources, this is a really good way to make sure that you're including protein in your outdoor diet. Meat floss is a really weird term altogether, but it is it's a Chinese product. You can find it in Chinatown. Somewhat, I know, carries it for sure. It comes in little plastic containers. It looks like candy floss, except it's made from pork, beef, or fish. It's a dehydrated, shelf-stable product. Usually it's actually included in Asian like chow mein and stir fries and things like that as a texture addition because it's dry and crunchy and flavorful. But we can rehydrate it for really good results. For example, one of the free recipes I have in that recipe companion on my website is for a pulled pork. And I do that using pork rousong or pork meat floss. And you can basically make a really nice pulled pork sandwich with it. The texture's a little off. It's called meat floss for a reason. So it's not quite like pulled pork, but it's pretty close. And really you can use this to replace meat in any dish. So harkening back to that idea of does it need to be freeze dried, meat floss is a really good substitute choice for meat in your meals because it rehydrates really, really well and has really good flavor. The thing to be aware of though is that it can have gluten and other things that you might not be able to eat depending on your dietary requirements. I'm gonna throw these guys up there and let us all look at them, and I'll see if there's anyone that I really want to talk about because time is running on us. Hard Fisker is a fish product. Gimli Meat Market carries it. It's Icelandic in background, but it's really good for including fish in your meals. It's basically a fish jerky. Yeah. Anything stand out here that you'd like to know more about before I flip slides?
Uh, I'm not seeing anything in the chat, Paul, other than someone was offering some knowledge about holy couscous and how that's another good thing that they like to source.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, couscous is something that I do talk about more in the book, both from a gluten-free perspective as well as just in general as a pasta option. So some things that surprised me as I was going through this. Really, you know what, ground beef was probably the thing that surprised me the most. One of the first meals that I made was a shepherd's pie using dehydrated ground beef, and just how crunchy it remained, and you know, every bite was kind of dicey in terms of how hard the thing was that I was eating. And just the surprise that even boiling it on the stove for 20 minutes at home never really corrected that. There are some carbohydrates that are just water greedy. You know what, your mashed potatoes, for example, or polenta as a cornmeal product, they will just suck up the water. So if you mix like your meat and sauce together with your mashed potatoes in the bowl all at the same time and try to rehydrate that, basically what's going to happen is that the potatoes are going to steal all of the water before the rest of the meal gets anything. And you're just going to have to keep adding water and adding water and adding water, and that those potatoes will become soupy before everything else gets anything. So my recommendation in the book is actually to package those things separately and rehydrate them separately and then mix them together for eating. So yeah. Raw noodles stay raw. You know the Lipton soup noodles, like your chicken noodle soup noodles, or even like those broad egg noodles? I thought both of those were going to rehydrate perfectly just by adding boiling water. Like I got the soup noodles you can get at Bulk Barn on their own, and they don't. They become soft, but they don't cook. They still taste like raw noodles taste. So for me, the instant noodles and couscous are really the only two pasta solutions that I have found that will just rehydrate in a one-pot meal. Instant beans, so you can buy instant beans on the market, and they are the furthest thing from instant. Even when they finally arrive at your house and you look at the directions, they will tell you that they require 25 minutes of boiling before they're ready to eat. So for someone who's a vegetarian and is looking to include protein in their meals, this doesn't actually seem like a great option. Now that said, I did find a solution, and putting them in a food processor or a blender and pulsing them a few times just to split them all actually works wonders. Once they're broken up a little, they'll rehydrate with boiling water in under 10 minutes. And you don't need to keep it at a boil either. And sushi rice is way more complicated than it seems. For those of you who make sushi at home, you'll know that it's basically just rice, vinegar, and sugar. That's it. So it seemed to me that all I needed to do was take some minute rice, add some citric acid and some sugar. And every time that I tried any variation of that, it was just so single-notedly sour or single-notedly sweet, and never ever reached the complexity of sushi rice until I discovered powder that I had written on that last slide. And is a umeboshi plum is a Japanese plum that is fermented until it is both sour and sweet. And you can find it as a powder available on Amazon, and it creates a great sushi rice. This is a quote from Wikipedia that just says, an unvarying diet of staple foods prepared in the same manner can cause appetite exhaustion, leading to less caloric intake, I think that says. All your names are behind it. I put this here just because when we're on long trips, it's really important that we're able to vary up our meals so that they're not always the same, so that we don't get bored of eating the same thing over and over and over again, and as a result, not eat enough to supply the calories that we need. So yeah, I wrote a book, Feast on Adventure, and Fort White has been gracious enough to host it in their gift shop, and they are selling it online following this presentation. For any of you who would like to learn more or support Fort White or support the work that I've done, Yeah, Katrina's thrown it in the chat a few times. It's probably there if you want to go looking for it. I haven't really talked with them about this idea yet, but I think that I can probably sign any books that they're selling. So I will work that out with them over the next few days if that's something that you would be interested in. So Feast on Adventure, I am calling it a meal assembly book, not so much a cookbook. It's this idea of getting ingredients and putting them together, mixing them up, and then adding water later. I think that all of them are quality meals. I've worked really hard at balancing all of those principles that I talked about earlier. Most people who so far have tried the meals really enjoy them for flavor and texture. All of the meals are non-perishable. They might not last 25 years, but they'll definitely last a year. They are lightweight. They are really easy to prep when you're out in the wilderness. And in general, they mix freeze-dried, dehydrated, and instant foods that you can buy rather than make yourself, although you can totally also make them yourself. And like I've talked about earlier, the reasons behind it, the reasons you might choose Feast on Adventure over other options are, it creates efficiency in how you prepare meals. It gives you the option of making familiar choices that you can bring out with you on your trips. It allows you to cook to your dietary conditions and ultimately make the most of your adventures. Don't spend all your time cooking and cleaning when you're out on vacation. And absolutely finally, it makes it easier to be bear safe. All of these meals are compact and small and lightweight and much easier to get in a bear bag or a bear barrel or a bear vault, and make sure that we aren't habituating animals, creating unsafe environments for them and for us. I'm going to leave this up. Take a screenshot if you'd like a photo of it. This is an actual recipe from the book, just to kind of give you an example of how the recipes are formatted, the kinds of things that are in them. This is a really easy one to vary, whether you are vegetarian, vegan, dairy-free, gluten-free, whatever. You'll see up in the top right-hand corner, all of my recipes have a little icon guide to let you know if they are dairy-free or gluten-free, like this one is, plus whether or not they could be optionally free. So this one is optionally vegetarian and optionally vegan based on what choices you make in the recipe. For example, you'll see that it says to include half a cup of protein and recommends ground beef, but really any protein will do. So if you were vegan or vegetarian, you might choose instant beans or refried beans. Yeah. And you see there also the suggestion of changing out quinoa for the rice. I'm going to hope that everyone has taken a picture. I'm going to move to the next slide quickly. This is going to show you 12 photos of books from the recipe, and then we're pretty well done. That's the fireside burrito bowl I just showed you the recipe of. That's what spaghetti with instant noodles looks like. One of my personal favorites, the ferocious spicy pierogi mash. This is a great vegan recipe. It's beans and rice, Venezuelan style. This is an example of one that needs more cooking. So you rehydrate the Johnny cake mix and then fry it in the skillet.
These look delicious, Paul. I'm just going to encourage people to pop questions in the chat now. We can take about 5 minutes to finish up if there are questions. Oh. These look so like gourmet.
They can be gourmet. They don't have to be though.
But flavor-wise, I agree. It's really nice to eat something when you're camping that really tastes good. There was one person wondering about receiving the recording of this webinar for reference. I don't know if that's something that that we at Fort White could share, but I don't know. You do have all of this materials in the book too. Is that correct?
Correct. Yeah, pretty well all of this is available in the book in one form or another.
Yeah, good idea to get the book. I also popped the link to your website in the chat, and there's lots of resources there too.
Yeah.
just gonna pop that in there too. Just a second here.
So yeah, John, I would really recommend, so the fireside burrito that I put in here, I think is a really great option for someone starting out. If you're just looking for something that you could make very simply yourself, kind of what I talked about early on, kind of the mix of commercial and non-commercial. So grab yourself a Knorr side, or grab yourself some stovetop and take it out and dehydrate some of Costco's canned chicken, right? You can even get commercial gravies, right? They sell powdered gravy. So if you don't want to go down the whole road of like getting bouillon and adding clear gel to mix your own gravy, take a tablespoon of powdered gravy from a pack, take a half cup of dehydrated Costco canned chicken, and take a half cup of stovetop. And basically you've got chicken gravy and stovetop for a weekend. Yeah, so for dairy products and powders, Amazon lists a company called Arneson Farms as well as Hoosier Farms. And I know Hoosier Farms has their own website. I've used their heavy cream, I've used their cheddar cheese powder, and their sour cream powder. All three of those products are really, really good. My book talks about, it has recipes. So you saw the photo for the spicy pierogi mash. That uses cheddar cheese powder, Parmesan cheese powder, and sour cream powder. There's a recipe for Alfredo, so like a pasta Alfredo that uses powders like that as well. And I will also say that for both those recipes and some of the others, that I have created a recipe in my book for making a dairy-free version of those powders that actually is surprisingly good. Of course, had to try it. I can't just make it and not try it. My wife is actually dairy-free, so that's one of the precursors and motivations to why some of the recipes in the book. But so I needed to figure out how to make those things for her anyway, and I was really happy with the dairy-free versions.
I have one more question here that you can't see. Wondering about storing the meals once they're dried and you're taking them out on the trip. Is it Ziploc bags or?
Yeah, you know what? Ziploc bags will work just fine. I think that if you're trying to be environmentally conscious, you're probably better off finding yourself some reusable freezer bags. The other thing that I talk about in my book is if you know of Ball, the canning company, they actually have freezer jars. So they're these plastic jars you would make freezer jam in. And they have like a 500 milliliter one that's about the right size for all of these meals. That's not too heavyweight, and it's a lot easier to clean when you get home. So those are probably my two preferred products, or like reusable sandwich or freezer bags and the jars. But Ziploc bags work just fine. And in some cases you can reuse them for a while, but you can't reuse them forever. In terms of storage, like actual storage, you can just keep them in any cool, dry place. I do sometimes keep ours in the freezer if I think they're going to wait until the end of the summer to get used, or if I have stuff left at the end of the summer that we'll use next year, I just store those in the freezer just to make sure that they don't go rancid.
All right, I'm not seeing any more questions, and we are unfortunately running out of time here. Thank you so much, Paul, for contributing this presentation to our Earth Week at Home celebration. I hope I'm speaking on behalf of everyone here, but I certainly learned a lot. I'm really looking forward to looking through my copy of the book and getting some great ideas for this summer. So for those of you tuning in, take a moment to check out our other Earth Week presentations that are listed on the Fort White Alive website on our calendar at fortwhite.org. And we also hope that you take the opportunity to step outside and enjoy your neighborhood nature this weekend as we celebrate our beautiful planet. So everyone, I hope you have a great day and hope to see you on another one of these soon. Okay, thank you, Paul.
Yep, so long everyone.
Bye everyone.